everyone. Welcome back to a Slice of Empathy podcast. It's been quite a minute. We've had a bit of a unintentional break or hiatus, I should say. I had to take a little bit of a break after suffering from some burnout. And there was a lot of things going on in the background, a lot of life things happening and going on. So I decided to take a step back a little bit and kind of evaluate my priorities a bit and kind of shifting some things that are on my plate. And it took me a minute. It was actually my mom's suggestion to... if you watch my YouTube channel, you'll know that I probably updated at least 3 to 4 times a week. And the time that it took to record the videos, not only just recording the videos, but to edit the videos each week, in addition to having a full-time job and other responsibilities, I was just so busy, and I had so many other things going on the weekend, and I just felt like I just never could just relax. And so I took a little bit of a step back. I had actually intended to come back from the hiatus about a month ago, but I just kind of honestly went with the flow. I felt like I wasn't really quite ready yet, and I think a lot of it was I didn't want to disappoint anyone. Maybe you guys can relate. And I try to be as consistent as possible. I want to stick to a date. But also, I had a previous boss tell me at one point, we're not saving lives. No one's going to die if a podcast doesn't go up or, if something doesn't get done, right? It's not a life-saving profession. So I had to take that time unintentionally that I needed for myself. And so officially we're going to be going into season 2 of a Slice of Empathy podcast. We're in season 2 now. And yeah, I still want to go on with the intent of sharing my life story. I think we're kind of getting towards the end of that, to present day anyway. And so before we get started, I'll go ahead and share with you some new life updates, things that have been kind of going on. As I mentioned, I've been dealing a little bit with burnout, and some of the things that I took away from that time off as I decided I am going to stick to a once monthly podcast schedule because that's realistically what I can maintain at the moment. If I have any extra time, or I will try and get a bonus episode up whenever feasible. But right now, once monthly seems doable. And on my YouTube, it's probably going to be once a week consistently. I have moved into Instagram Reels and TikToks a little bit more. It's a little bit more time saving, and I have cut back on some of the YouTube videos that I've been doing just because there's just other things that I want to focus on. And so I just took those couple of months and tried to regroup and kind of come back with hopefully things a little bit more together. The last couple of months, I have been honestly reading a ton. And I don't know what happened. Like over the years, I used to go to the library a ton. I was a total bookworm as a kid. Friends were bookworms. Went to the library like every day after school. And I don't know, like when we first moved up to Sacramento, we did go to the library a bit within like the first year or so. But we've been here 9 years, and so I'd say for the past 8 years or so, we just really haven't. And I don't know, my husband and I would go. He's really into true crime novels. That's his thing. I'm into romance and not typical romance. I used to, honestly, I have a guilty pleasure for Harlequin, but I prefer like the romance mixed in with suspense or mystery, something to kind of keep you a little bit on your toes or on the edge of your seat. So that's really kind of what I've been kind of looking for. And so I actually joined the library in my city. I think I've only, almost 8 years I've been living in the city. I think I'd only been to this library once, really small. But they have a network where you can place holds online and then just pick up books at your library from wherever it is within the city or the county. So that's been really, really cool. That's kind of more of been the last month or 6 weeks or so that I've been doing. And for those of you who don't already know, my husband and I renewed our vows early in May. It was our 15th wedding anniversary, and we went to Kona, Hawaii. It was such a magical time. We had a blast. 100% do it over again. And I think also leading up to that point, we were just super, super stressed. And I don't know about you guys, but as much as I love the travel, I don't love the anxiety leading up to it. The planning can be kind of stressful. You know, of course, saving money, things can get expensive, and Hawaii is in particular is expensive. And we were nearing the point where we were thinking that we may have had to postpone the trip to maybe November, which is also still a really nice time to go. But I really wanted to renew our vows on our wedding anniversary, technically anyway. When we got married, our intention was to get married on our dating anniversary, but that fell in the middle of the week. So we got married a couple of days later, which happened to fall in 2008 on Mother's Day weekend. And we wanted to I think our intent was to renew our vows on our dating anniversary, because I think we regret a little bit not just honestly getting married on our dating anniversary. I feel like it's a little bit more symbolic for us, because it factors in all those years that we've spent together. And so yeah, I think that was something that was really important to us. And we were just honestly busting our asses to make extra cash and do what we could to save up. This had been honestly something that we'd been planning for over a year. And as it got closer and closer, there was just things that were happening in the background, and we just weren't sure if it was going to happen or not. And I feel like the universe just came through. I had just, more than anything else, I wanted that to happen. It had been something we'd been looking forward to, something that I believe that we deserve to celebrate after, so many years. And once I finish this podcast or finish the life story section, you'll understand why that was so important to us after so many trials and tribulations, so to speak, within our relationship, and being able to work through those things. And we only went for 5 days. It was a little bit shorter than I expected, but the universe just had a way of kind of coming through, I think, about a month or so before. And of course, we were just busting our asses trying to save up and, have enough money. And, it was still a budget trip. For those of you who know, I travel a lot, so I try to find ways to travel on the cheap without spending too much. And it just seemed to work out, and I'm just so thankful for that. And we paid a videographer and a photographer in addition to, of course, the minister. We got a really great package rate, which is pretty affordable considering we renewed our vows on the beach of Hawaii. Shout out to Aloha Fun Weddings. They did a phenomenal job. So that package included the minister and also the photographer and videographer. Just an amazing time. And it was a traditional Hawaiian ceremony where the vows were in both English and Hawaiian. And yeah, it was just so magical. And for those of you who know, I've always said if we didn't get married, we got married in South Lake Tahoe, which is a very beautiful place. But if we hadn't gotten married there, we'd probably have gotten married in Hawaii, or probably got hitched. And what better way to celebrate than, the next best thing is your vow renewal. So it was just really special for us. And, it took a little bit of planning, and there was a lot of stress kind of going into it, but it was so worth it. And as I said, we went for 5 days. We rented a car through Turo, which I like a lot more than a typical rental car agency. We had a really great experience. The host was great, punctual, allowed us to extend our drop-off time by a couple hours. We didn't have to pay for anything. Highly, highly recommend. And it was more affordable than a typical car rental. I think what I don't really like about car rentals in general is that they never seem to have the car that you picked out or that you rented, or they try and upsell you like quite a bit more. So this just kind of eliminates all that. You do it through the app. It's very similar to Uber, you put in your driver's license and then your information. You can book insurance, anything like that through Turo. Highly, highly recommend. I'm not sponsored or paid by them or anything. We just had a great experience, and I would definitely do that again. We also booked a manta ray excursion, which was a blast. We both were kind of sick towards the end of that. We were a little nauseated, and it was a phenomenal experience. And for those of you who don't know, Kona, Hawaii, is the hub for manta ray snorkeling, and it happens at night. And they take you out on a boat, and they have you hold on to this thing that lights up the bottom. I got a inexpensive GoPro dupe that worked phenomenal for what we needed for under $100 phenomenally, to record some of that footage. So that's going to be probably going up soon if it hasn't already, that footage, my Hawaii trip footage. It was great. They took us out on a boat. I think it was around 7:30. It was super, super choppy. Apparently it's a seasonal thing, and as you get into like June and July, the waters kind of calm down a little bit, but it was super, super choppy. And both, I think my husband ended up getting sick a little bit, and we were both like pretty nauseated at the end with the waters. I got kind of nervous because although I've snorkeled a couple of times previously, this was at night and the waters were super rough, and yeah, so I was just a little bit nervous, and I'm like, okay, I had to admit, okay, I need some help just getting in. It was mostly for me just getting in. I just felt kind of nervous to jump in. So they put down the ladder, and I just walked down the ladder, totally fine. They brought me over. Really, really cool experience. If you're going to Kona or Big Island, highly recommend looking into the manta ray snorkeling. I would recommend that you do a regular snorkeling tour first, just with maybe sea turtles or something like that, just the regular snorkeling, because they do prefer you to have some snorkeling experience. So if you are interested in that, I'd recommend doing a regular snorkeling tour just to kind of get a feel for it, because as I said, the water, it's dark and it was very rough, and so it was a little unnerving at the beginning, but it was so well worth it. And I think honestly that was the only tour that we paid for. And then of course our vow renewal expenses. And yeah, so I think the last time we went to Hawaii, we had a lot more guided tours. This time we decided to do some self-guided things. We ended up driving, I think it was like halfway around the island to see, I think it was Volcano National Park. So it was about 2 hours from where we were staying and 2 hours back. So a really cool way to see the island and being able to drive around. So that's also why we rented a car this time. I mean, if you're staying in like one central hub for a couple days, you may not need to rent a car, but I would highly recommend it just so you can see more of the island. And it was really well worth it. Of course, Hawaii is pricier. I felt like eating out was pricier than it is even here in California, where things could be even more expensive comparatively to maybe like the Midwest or the South. So it was really, really nice though. It was a tighter budget for sure. So I think what we did was we went to the ABC stores. We picked up some things for like breakfasts. We picked up some granola and some milk, some like things that we could maybe like eat at our hotel or Airbnb, because we had a little like portable electric stove and a microwave and a little kitchenette. So we were able to prepare some things at our Airbnb. So that was quite nice. And I think we got a decent rate. I think it was about $800 that we spent on is it 5 nights, 4 or 5 nights, was the best deal that we could get. And yeah, we just had a blast. It was very, very magical. And we had, it was just really, it was great. Highly, highly recommend. Almost didn't want to leave. And I think next time we go to Hawaii, we're going to look into going to Kauai. I think that's the only island that we haven't seen yet. We've seen the others, or at least the major ones like Big Island, Maui, and Oahu. Those are the big islands. Those are all the islands that we've seen so far. So I think Kauai is one that we're maybe targeting next. And as for trips in the docket, I am a little bit bummed that we don't have anything lined up for international this year. We have done quite a few local, like I should say, somewhat local, traveling down to Southern California, which is 7 hours. We're going to be doing that again because we're going to San Diego Comic Con, and then we'll be going to FileFest 2023, which is an X-Files convention in Minnesota, and that's in September. And then we're going to be planning to go to Japan and China coming up in February. And then my husband and I were discussing taking a road trip up to Vancouver, Canada next June. So it's like a year from now. It's a little bit of ways off, but it comes around like really, really quickly, just like going to Hawaii and renewing our vows did. It creeps up on you. So I think I can reconcile us not having any international trips this year because we do have a couple next year, which I'm really, really excited for. So after September, probably just kind of like keep it kind of like laying low a little bit. And maybe if we can swing it next fall of 2024, maybe we could try and go back to Hawaii because it's just a really great time. But we'll see. I think that's kind of some of the big life updates that we've kind of had for you. I have my vow renewal, or the shortened version of it, over on YouTube, so if you guys want to check that out, it was really, really special. And then we'll have our Hawaii vlog going up as well. And so it's been a hot minute. And I don't think I mentioned this in my last vlog, but we had a couple of kitties follow us home back in February, like mid-February. I think my last podcast came up in March. I think it was in March or the end of February. And we had a couple of kitties claim us, which a couple of years back, I had put it out into the universe that I wanted some of our kitties to come to us organically, or to find us, so to speak. And because that's never happened to us. And just one day, my husband and I were on our walk, and about halfway through it, we saw these two kittens who just took a liking to us. One was a little bit shy. He wouldn't entirely come up to you, but the black one did. And we would pet them and whatnot. And so we continued on our way. And we lived next to a busy street. So by the time we got to our street, we were kind of getting kind of nervous because I'm like, oh, we don't want the kittens to dodge out into the street. But no, they stayed on the one side where we were walking the entire time. We looked back a couple times and like, oh, okay, maybe they stopped. No, they followed us all the way home. And then we put out some food for them, like, oh, okay. But I don't know, at that time, I had a feeling that they were gonna stay. I can't explain it. I just had a feeling. And I think they probably followed us for about a mile. And we're pretty sure they're brothers just because they were about the same size. They stuck together. And they were not chipped, no collar, not neutered. So we took care of all of that a little bit later on. But about the next day, they were gone. So I'm like, okay, maybe they went home, right? The following day after that, because we're feeling a little bit bummed, they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess it's just not meant to be, right? Okay. The following day, my husband said that they were outside. They were outside again, both of them. And they didn't stay too far away from each other, but they were just hanging around our complex. And so the rest was history, really, from there. We waited a little bit. We went to see if they had a microchip. No chip, as I said. And so we're like, okay, they must be stray kitties. And we ended up, I think a couple weeks later, getting their neuter scheduled, because I think at the time a lot of vets and whatnot were pretty backed up. And so we couldn't get them in as quickly as we wanted to, but it ended up working out. We ended up getting them neutered and fixed in March. And now they are a forever part of our family. And it was totally unexpected because honestly, at this point in time, you may recall I had adopted 2 kitties around July of last year, and I'm like, okay, I think we're good. Like, I don't want any more cats. Like, we're good. But how can you say no when they choose you, especially if they're a pair and they need to go together? And it's just like, yeah, and this was something that like a few years ago, I'm like, I just want cats. I just want a pair of cats that would find us that way. And ideally, I wanted them to also be related. We had a macchiato and a mocha, and I also wanted a matcha. And so we ended up naming the tabby Matcha. And then the little black kitty, I'm like, oh, I don't really know what to name him. Because I only thought of like mocha, matcha, and macchiato. I didn't know what to name the little black kitty. So my mom had this idea, like, oh, what about Boba? I'm like, it's funny because that crossed my mind too. So then he, the little lineage of M's stopped, and now he is a little boba, which makes sense. Matcha, like a boba matcha. So, so cute. They're adorable. It's, my hands are full. Now you can see why my hands are full. But without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and get into the rest of the podcast. So, on my last episode, we left off with talking about how I had gotten laid off my job and how we were barely staying afloat and renting our apartment in the Bay Area, just barely making it. And once I lost my job, like, there was just no way we could continue to live there. And so we had to figure something out. And so we just kind of honestly, almost on a whim, we're like, okay, let's just move. Like, let's just take this opportunity to move. Like, we can stay with my mom and, get back on our feet, find new jobs, things like that. And yeah, that's what we kind of decided. And initially it sounded kind of crazy because I honestly never thought I would move. But I don't know, if you live in the Bay Area or you have lived here, everything is so expensive. There was just no prospects of us ever honestly being able to own a home or anything like that, which we wanted eventually. At that point in time, we thought maybe we wanted kids. That wasn't going to happen. Like, we were just like struggling financially. We were like recently graduated from college. There was potential, but like the job market was very saturated. It was just looking very doom and gloom. And so we're like, okay, let's just move. And honestly, we had a lot of family that didn't agree with our choice to move. And I will say that, sometimes, I'll say this as a kind of recovering people pleaser, you have to just do what's good for you. Because although valid and sometimes coming from a rightfully intended place, it is your life to live. It's no one else's. You have to make the best decisions for you. Only you know what you need and what your wants are. And, sometimes you just have to take a leap. Like, we just kind of took the leap. So we ended up moving out of our apartment, getting a U-Haul. We had a storage unit because my husband and I and my kitty shared a very small bedroom in my mom's mobile home. And so we had to have a storage unit. We got a storage unit, stored some things, and this was the intention of, okay, we'll get back on our feet, get new jobs. At least that wasn't the intention for my husband. He actually transferred his job. However, once he transferred, he was basically on call and very, very, very part-time. And with the hope of becoming full-time, because he was covering for a coworker who was going on maternity leave, he was temporarily full-time, and then dropped down to basically on call. So eventually he ended up having to look for another job because basically every single day he would have to call in and basically be like, am I going to work tonight? And he would work like the swing shift, which could be anywhere from 6 to like 12 or 1. He never really knew what time he was getting off of work. So he ended up having to find another job like later on. And meanwhile, I was trying to make it off unemployment. And since my unemployment was based on my job prior to the one that I had a couple months before, it wasn't much. I think it was only like $300-400 a month, which doesn't really get you very far. So it took me about 3 months to find another job. I ended up having to take a part-time real estate gig where I was doing some social media management at the time. And ideally, of course, I wanted something full-time with benefits. But I needed something because that unemployment was not going to really get me too far. And I think at that time, unemployment was only for 6 months. I was already 3 months in. So I wanted to get something before that ran out, right? So I ended up taking that gig, and then simultaneously I ended up going through a temporary agency and getting another real estate-ish type gig. I think it was with a title company. I think it was with some title company, a mortgage company. It was with a mortgage company, and that was like temp to hire. I liked the video editing and everything seemed to go pretty smoothly until it didn't. And when I say until it didn't, I was working on a video at the end of the week and I had some pressing questions for the company owner that I needed to address. I couldn't reach him. I couldn't get a hold of him. I didn't know what to do. And so I think it was an email that was supposed to go out, didn't go out because I wasn't entirely sure. I didn't want the email to go out without getting whatever it was addressed first. And so then that Monday I heard from the temp agency basically saying that they decided to like let me go or whatever. And I'm pretty sure it was part of that, but also I just really felt like it wasn't my fault. I couldn't reach the CEO. I called him like, okay, I need this address first. I didn't want it to have something go wrong, So I feel like it was kind of one of those, I don't know, you're damned if you do, doomed if you don't kind of situations, because I'm like, I really, wanted to get this addressed and I couldn't reach him. So I didn't know what else to do. I think I may have contacted the agency too, and which was fine. Honestly, I ended up finding something else, I think shortly after that. I think it was like a couple weeks later. And I ended up landing another part-time job with a hospitality company, corporate, and they're in a corporate position doing social media, was also part-time, and it also allowed the opportunity to work from home a couple of days a week, which was great. And so I ended up taking that position. So simultaneously, for about a month, I was working for the temp agency for the mortgage company and the real estate company. And the funny thing is that the owners of the both companies were friends. And they found out that I was working for both, one or the other. It didn't seem like it was a big deal or anything like that. I had no idea. They knew of each other. So I guess it was kind of a small world. And so I went on and ended up finding, after that position ended, I ended up finding another position, with the hospitality company. Never really told the real estate guys, about that. The other company, let me go, and I'm not sure, because I ended up later on getting laid off from the real estate company. I was there for 6 months. And I was basically the admin / social media manager person, again, working part-time, helping them with their listings and social media and whatnot. So, it was great. They were friendly, great to work for. And I think they maybe just had some financial stuff, or they just kind of, and I kind of had a feeling it was coming. I think I was working there that day, and they were two brothers. One of them was like, oh, okay, I have something I want to chat to you about. Let's chat about it on the way to wherever they were going. And so I'm like, I don't know. It just seemed a little, I don't know. I just had a feeling. And so when one of them came back, that's kind of when they told me, they kind of gave me the news. They're like, oh, okay, well, have some bad news, decided to let you go. And I think they paid me through the end of the week or something like that. So very generous. I don't know. I think they just their needs had changed or something like that. And they were more than willing to give me a great reference for my next position. So I don't think it was necessarily anything about I did or didn't do. I think their needs just kind of changed. It was just a new position for them, and maybe financially they didn't want to go forward with it, which was fine. And so I ended up going a little bit more full-time with my hospitality position. Instead of coming in the afternoons, I was coming in the mornings. And that was about 30 hours a week. Initially, it was like 20 hours a week. And then after that, I'm like, well, I'm no longer at my other job. My availability is opened up a bit. And so I went 30 hours a week. I still didn't have like benefits or anything like that. I think you have to be entirely full-time to get benefits, which was kind of a bummer. But I stayed on because one of my coworkers at the time was going on maternity leave. And I was told, there'll be potential for moving into full-time. And it was a really great place to work. There was like themed, themed cooked Fridays where I'd get free food, work like at demo. And it was a position where I had to work in a storefront and like the retail storefront for a bit. I worked in the retail storefront for a bit just to get experience for a couple days, just to kind of see the retail side of things, which I think is helpful for anyone who works in corporate to kind of get that feel of what things look like on the store level. And so that was all cool and whatnot. And I worked there, so like 30 hours a week. I ended up just staying there. I'm like, okay, well, I can eventually move into full time. And long story short, that ended up not happening. I was there for about a year and a half, I think, before I actually moved into my current role. But I think about 6 months to a year or so in. It was about 6 months in because I was job hunting for about a year before I took my current job. So I think it was about 6 months in where I think my coworker came back from maternity leave, and they kind of were testing me out for her position and moving into that position. Ultimately, it didn't work out. It was a bit of a bummer. And I don't know, I still to this day have mixed feelings about, we worked with great people. I also just felt like I was being really underpaid compared to what I was making when I left the Bay Area. And I had a temp agency tell me, they're like, well, here in the Sacramento area, things are cheaper. Don't expect to make nearly as much. But only a year and a half after I moved here, I ended up making what I made in the Bay Area. I got hired on a job making what I made in the Bay Area. So she was wrong. So at the time I was like, oh, okay, I guess maybe I'll have to settle for something less. But yeah, just a reminder to not settle, to know your worth, even when it seems like from someone who's a professional, from a career coach or a temp agency. They told me no, don't expect to make as much. And ultimately I had to make the choice to move on because I was getting paid very little. I had no benefits. This was at the time where there was no vacation time, even for part-timers, no paid days off, sick time, until later on where they had that mandated minimum 3 days of, I think, California sick time. And so that was a bit rough. And I remember when I got laid off from that real estate company, I had to call my husband. I'm like, hey, got laid off. You have to come pick me up. And during that time, he had actually met up with a couple of his uncles, and he had to come back and get me, which was honestly, and explain why, which was really honestly kind of humiliating. And to top that off, one of his uncles, I guess later on that night, I don't know, I think he was drunk from what I heard later, he was messaging me, and I don't remember exactly what was said. It was so long ago now. It was 8 years ago. But basically he, I don't know, made me feel like I wasn't as far as I should be career-wise. Oh, you're working for a retail job or whatever, And I'm like, yeah, but I'm working at the corporate level. I'm not working in the storefront. Even if I did, why is there that judgment? And yeah, there was some judgment even from my own family, in regards to that. And it's just honestly, some of the retail jobs I've had, especially when I worked for the coffee shop, were some of the most difficult jobs I've ever had, like physically, like, and the most demanding. So I feel like people shouldn't really be judged by that. And it's like, here I am, I have a college degree, I'm doing the best I can. I just, I want to, I want to try and be working before I find something better. And yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, that was kind of rough. And yeah, I think I unfriended him on Facebook, and I'm like, it just wasn't cool. But yeah, if you're in a similar position, don't let anyone discourage you or make you feel less than. Yeah, because like, sure, I was working for a retail hospitality company, but I was like at corporate level, so it's like, why? I don't understand. It was weird. Anyway, it was probably like more to do with like his own issues and being drunk at the time. Whatever. It's like water under the bridge now. But yeah, so my husband had taken a job with an appraisal company after working for the trucking job that he was doing, which ended up being full time with benefits, and that was great. This was while I was working part time, and I think we managed. But yeah, it was a bit rough, and yeah, so in the meantime, we were living like with my mom and stepdad at the time, which wasn't like super ideal. It was a kind of tight space. It was different circumstances, lots of passive aggressiveness and tension in the house, and old wounds that had kind of reopened, and yeah, it was tough. And I mean, we had to stay with my dad for a week too after we moved out of our apartment, because we moved out of our apartment, but my husband had to finish off his last week at his job before we transferred and officially moved and packed everything else up in our car with our cat and moved officially. And wasn't an ideal situation. As I said, a lot of folks were saying, oh, you're not going to get paid nearly as much. Is the job market okay? And, I mean, maybe it came from a loving place, but it was kind of discouraging initially. And I fast forward to today. I mean, we own a home and we both have full-time, great jobs. So, yeah, I can't speak against that at all. But yeah, it was kind of tough, and I felt kind of like a little bit like, not micromanaged, but I felt like we couldn't do a lot of things on our own, like on our own. Like sometimes mom would want to go too. Sometimes it would just be like, we want some time just for like the two of us, or to kind of get out for a while. Because I mean, anyone who's lived with family, like, like sometimes you just want some personal time. I think it's common for most people. And yeah, so it's just different circumstances, like, versus the way it is today. My mom lives with us. It's little bit different circumstances. But yeah, like, she was in a long-term unhealthy relationship, which factored into it. It was a very difficult situation. We had opposite schedules and stuff, so sometimes getting up for work and just like, being a married couple, like living with family sometimes too, it can be a little challenging. We're all sharing one bathroom. It was hard, like, but I was thankful for that time, because it allowed us to get to where we are today, ultimately. To, ended up, a year later, we ended up moving into our own place again, and being able to get back on our feet, versus if we didn't have that, I don't know what we would have done, because, I mean, we didn't have enough money to move on our own. We had to live somewhere. And yeah, so I don't know what else we would have done, to be quite honest, or what else would have happened. So I realize now, like, that was the necessary step to having things ultimately improve for the better. Sometimes you get set back. You take a couple steps back, you get set back a little bit, and you take 3, 4, 5 steps forward. I think that's how it worked out for us. But ultimately, like, we are glad that, I was just thinking the other day, I'm like, I'm glad that I got laid off that job in the Bay Area, because if that didn't happen, we'd probably still be there. We probably would be just depressed because we couldn't buy a house. Like, we'd probably be just barely making rent. Even, even if the jobs quote unquote paid more, the rent was astronomically more expensive. When we finally did move into our apartment up here, at the time, although in the last 9 years things have gotten far more expensive, but at the time, I think it was a decent one-bedroom apartment, no frills. I mean, we had a dishwasher, we had central heating and air, which most Bay Area apartments don't. And if you do have it, you pay a premium fee. It's a luxury apartment, and it's much more expensive. It was $825. It was $825. It was a smaller one-bedroom apartment. I think it was like 650 square feet. So about the same size as one of the first apartments we'd ever lived in, which was fine. Like, we were just kind of getting started again. But the price was right. I mean, it was half of what we were paying in the Bay Area for an apartment of exactly the same size. So it was basically like half. So it was well worth it. And even though we were being paid less at the time, I wasn't entirely full-time at my job. And we weren't making like quite as much money. So it was doable. It was still doable. Things were still tight, but it was doable. But yeah, it was a little tough, push come to shove. But yeah, I think I'm going to end here with that. Before, like, when we first moved and kind of got situated in California, and during that first year that we moved, I also want to say we had put ourselves out there more than ever before. My husband and I are, if you know us, we're both introverted, and we made more friends, I think, here in the first 1 to 2 years than we, I think, ever have had in the Bay Area that we've lived there for most of our lives. And we got started. And for anyone who may be going through a similar transition, whether you're moving away for the first time or, whatever it is, you're moving to a new place, although there's newer apps and whatnot now, but when we first moved up, I think I had already been on meetup.com, but we utilized meetup.com to get involved with group. I think we were more politically active back then. We were in political groups. We were in groups for folks in their 20s and 30s. And we also used, I think, Craigslist Platonics. We're looking for couple friends because we're a young married couple, and so we're looking for some couple friends. And we had some really some great results from those. So for anyone who is new to an area, highly recommend those. I'm pretty sure there's other things out there too. I think there's like a Platonics app. I know there's like one that offers both like dating and just like friendships. If I think of it, I'll add it in here. But yeah, there's a few different ways to become involved, and honestly, I think that the best way is to join groups of similar interests. Say you're a foodie, maybe you'll join a group that loves doing potlucks or trying a new restaurant. We ended up joining later on a child-free group, and the child-free group, honestly, that's like the only meetup that I'm still in today, just because we're so busy. But I really love that group, and I've been in the same group the entire 9 years I've been here. The child-free group is basically of like-minded folks who have just decided not to have kids. And so I think it was about, actually during the year of transition, that we moved up from the Bay Area, when we were living at my mom's. And I think there was just something that just kind of clicked. And I actually, I think that was a big turning point for us, because I actually had just, I'm like, I was about 25 at this point, 25, 26. And I'm like, I really don't think I want kids. And just because I think of all of the hardships my husband and I have been through, especially financially, emotionally, and everything, I'm like, I'm nowhere near ready. And I think when we first, got married, got together, we're like, okay, yeah, we'll have kids by when we're like 25. And as I got older and older, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, the older I get, the less interested I am. Like, the less ready I feel, And I think that was a real turning point for us in a relationship, because I then had to tell my husband, I'm like, hey, I really don't think I want kids. And I had to let him decide, like, is he okay with that or not? And I laid out the reasonings why. I mean, some were personal, some were also, financial, us as a couple. And I'm like, I really think that, having kids, like, would just, after all the financial things we've been dealing with, and just a lot of other things, I'm like, I just don't think that it's for me, or like it would be great for us. And so it took, like, I kind of let him marinate that. I'm like, and don't go in with the expectation that I'm going to change my mind. It's just, because this is something that it just one day it just kind of clicked. I'm like, I don't think that lifestyle is for me. And I wanted to tell him right away, just because I didn't want to lead him on thinking that, oh yeah, someday I'll change my mind. The age old saying, I'm 34 now. And I still am very comfortable with that decision. And I think it's the best decision for us. And we are happy with our lives as is. But at that time, I'm like, I honestly was prepared for my marriage to end, because, in the how many years that we had been together. So I think we'd been together for 8 years at that point. Yeah. So we had been together 8 years at that point. We thought, with the intention that out someday we'd have kids, like everyone, like you get told, oh, you'll change your mind someday. And just as, like, we were getting older, and he's 6 years older than me, so he was like in his 30s, and I'm like, well, I really don't think that's what I want. And you have to decide, like, if you're okay with that or not. And I think for anyone who also might be listening, who may be going through something similar, I know it happens, sometimes, ideally before you get married is, the conversation that you want to have about, whether or not to have kids, how many, da-da-da. That's the conversation you usually want to have. But honestly, since we got married pretty young, we really did think we wanted kids. And then later on, I'm like, I don't know. Like, and there were signs along the way. Like, I was just never really like a maternal person. I just never really had that desire. I just thought that, oh, someday we'll get older, and that's just what you do. Like, that's just the next step, right? And but as I got older, and I had more, like, influences in my life, just like showcasing, like, this is like, this lifestyle, like, is a choice, like, like I have a choice, right? Is kind of when I decided, like, I don't think that's really for me. And I told my husband, like, don't hang around expecting me to change my mind. You have to decide if you're okay with this or not. And I think a lot of it is, we have people in our lives who, sometimes maybe they wanted kids, but they didn't find the right person, and they didn't want it enough to pursue, like, I don't know, other avenues, like fertility treatments or anything like that. And it didn't happen. So I told them, I'm like, you have to decide, like, if this is something that you're okay with also being in mind that, and for anyone who's at a crossroads deciding between the two choices, you can either, if you love your partner and you do get divorced because, say, one of you want kids, because, again, that's something you can't compromise on, you have to look back and think, what if you end up not finding that person? What if you end up leaving a relationship that was perfectly loving and fulfilling, and for some reason it doesn't work out, and you don't want kids. You don't want to, feel that regret. So I think there's kind of a gray area there, because I feel like, if your desire to have kids or not have kids is strong enough, you have to decide, and decide, like, what's the best option, because there's not really any going back from it. Like, you could try and see if maybe you find the right person, maybe you don't. So either way, you're going into uncharted territory, especially for the person that does want kids, and they want to find the right person or whatever. And sometimes sometimes it happens and it works out and it's great and everyone's happy, but sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes, like, do you want to throw away a perfectly, like, loving relationship into the unknown, and then go out into the unknown? So I guess it just depends. Like, what is stronger? Can you live with, well, I can be okay if I don't have kids? Like, because there are, not fence sitters, but there were folks who were like, they're kind of indifferent about it. They're like, I can have kids, I can maybe not have kids. Indifferent. I think my husband kind of moved into that territory until eventually where I think he decided he didn't want kids. Ultimately, he decided to get a vasectomy, and he chose that route for himself. I think as we both got older and realized the finances that are involved in having kids, and the emotional commitment, and how much our lives would have to change, I think that's when he realized that, okay, he's like, I think you're right. I think not having kids is the best for us. It took him a little while to kind of go through that process and decide, if he's okay with that. And ultimately, I was grateful because he decided that it was the best thing for us, and ultimately he decided he wanted to get a vasectomy. He decided that, kids are too expensive, and he's a gamer, he likes playing games, and when kids come into the picture, like, your life just changes, like, drastically. And so it was a little bit of a happy ending. I know it's not that way for everyone, but I wanted to add in that segment because I know for a lot of people that could be something that you struggle with. And I think people can change their minds. Maybe you do talk about having kids. Maybe, like I said, you do want kids initially, and maybe that changes. And I can kind of understand why they say to get married when you're a little bit older. I can kind of understand, as your brain doesn't fully stop developing until you're about 25, which was about the time that I made this choice. And yeah, so I am thankful. I'm so thankful. But at that time, I was ready for my marriage to end. Because he really, like, we had talked about names and, like, and everything is just, yeah. So I think this just goes to show that people can change drastically from the time they're younger until they're older. I think, yeah, everyone can change. Like, I feel entirely different than I was when I was 18. Like, and yeah, so I think I can understand why they say to, like, wait until you're a little bit, like, more mature to get married. I can understand that. At the time, like, well, but I also will say that regardless if you're in a long-term relationship or you're married or whatever, if you are with someone long-term when you are younger, you will either inevitably go one of two ways. You will either grow together or you will grow apart. There is no other way. And unfortunately, a lot of people, when they're young and they decide they want things differently, I think it's a natural course of action that, and assuming you don't have kids, you get divorced, you move on, with your life. But I think when you have a child young, or you have, you're married and you have a child young, there's so much more to consider, and it's much different than if it's just the two of you and you decide to go your separate ways. There's a lot more to that, and so I want to recognize that as well. If you're young and married and have young children, and I think honestly that was one of the reasons why it was always important to me, despite getting married young. I'm like, I don't want to have kids until like between 25 and 30. I got married at 19. Like, I don't want to have kids anytime soon, right? And so I'm glad I made that choice, because as I got older, I kind of realized, okay, and now at my current point of life, I'm like, there's no way I could have been a parent at that age. Like, I was still like going through so much of my own stuff. Like, there was just like no way. But now that I think about it, I'm like, if we did have a kid, right around now would probably be an ideal point for us to think about it, but we don't. But I think I've gotten to a point where now I feel like I'm in a place where I could consider it, like, if we wanted to. But that's not something that we want. But yeah, I couldn't imagine, like, if that was something we did want, like, you know, having kids like in my 20s. I mean, I probably wasn't in like a place where I was mentally ready until I was over 30 at least. With that said, I want you guys take your time, give it some thought, like with in regards to having kids, and there's no right or wrong answer. Everyone is different, and there will be people who will come in and say, you'll change your mind, or, what if your partner wants kids, or shouldn't you give him a baby, or what? There's all kinds of shit that people will say. You're still young, there's all kinds of stuff. And again, I want to reiterate, you will have to just do what is best for you, and not just because society or family or, different voices that are coming at you are telling you that you need to do something. And that goes for everything. It goes for buying a house, having kids, any sort of decision you make. If you want to move, you have to think about what you want ultimately, and live your life as authentically as you can, because life is short. So I want to leave you guys with that. Thank you guys so much for listening. It ended up being a little bit longer than I intended, but maybe it was meant to be. So yeah, guys, until next time, I will see you guys all soon. Hopefully it won't be a long hiatus, but I don't think it will. But thank you guys for being patient with me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!